Who authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus? Srila Prabhupada said, and this is the 22nd of April, 1977, yes, I shall choose some Guru. Does Amoga Lila also consider the followers of Madhva Acharya to be Abrahmanas? And Srila Prabhupada said, what is the use of creating some rascal Gurus? And the GBC was wrong about the zonal Acharya system. This is when Srila Prabhupada gave his order for the selected man to now start. Hare Krishna. All glories to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the current spiritual master of the universe. On the 1st of June, 2025, Amoga Lila Prabhu, who is currently well known in ISKCON, released a 1-hour YouTube video titled Rtvikism Debunked, the complete reference. I have decided to create this rebuttal video to address many of the points he made in his video because what he said is completely false and totally misleading. My qualifications in addressing this issue is that I have researched this issue in great depth for many decades, and I have recently published a 1,100-page book on this topic titled Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, The Definitive Analysis. My name is Amoga Das, and I am a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada, initiated in 1973. Before I address Amoga Lila's points, I want to address the following. Finding that in many of the recent videos attempt to supposedly debunk the Ritvikism representative system of initiations, they refer to Krishnakant Desai as the guru of the Ritvik system, or that he is the Shiksha Guru for those who support Srila Prabhupada's system of Ritvik initiations. This is an abhorrently false and misleading claim. First of all, Krishnakant Desai is not the guru or creator of the Ritvik system concept. Rather, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada is. And second of all, I want to clearly state herein that I have never, to this date, read the Final Order book. I have not based or formulated my conclusions on anything written by Krishnakant Desai. I did my own research using the Veda base and the historical evidences that I have obtained. Krishnakant Desai is not and never was any sort of Shiksha Guru for me on this topic or any other topic. So all those claims being made regarding him and this issue do not apply to myself or my views and conclusions on this topic. Now to my rebuttal of Amoga Lila's video, Rtvikism Debunked. Amoga Lila Prabhu starts his video by declaring that the Ritvik representative of the Acharya system, which was established and authorized by my Guru Maharaj, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as Maya philosophy. He calls it Ritvik Maya Vada. Personally, I find such a term, and especially his condescending attitude toward my Guru system, as an insult to Srila Prabhupada, as he is the one who has established this Ritvik system for initiations within his ISKCON mission. Stooping to such demeaning tactics is distracting and frivolous. It distracts from the important aspects of this issue and fits the category of mudslinging and name-calling, or the dog a bad name and hang it. I find it very insulting to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. There are two main aspects of this issue within ISKCON. One is the ongoing Ritvik representative of the Acharya system that His Divine Grace created and authorized, is it still bona fide after he has physically departed? And two, are the GBC ordained Diksha Gurus in ISKCON actually authorized and bona fide Gurus? At 54 seconds into the video, Amoga Lila gives a straw man argument that with the Ritvik representative system, he claims that the succession will come to an end with Srila Prabhupada. No, of course not. Srila Prabhupada has clearly stated that he will give his order to someone, but when that will be, we don't know. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not select his successor before he departed this world. Did the disciplic succession end with him? No. And no one is claiming it will end with Srila Prabhupada except people like Amoga Lila, who give it as a false argument. Starting at 2 minutes and 20 seconds in on the video, Amoga Lila declares that the Ritvik representative of the Acharya system, which no longer required or involved the physical presence of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, was only valid while Srila Prabhupada was physically present in this world. I have a lot to say about this, so I will try to be brief. To begin with, on May 28, 1977, Srila Prabhupada met with a small handful of GBC members in his room in Vrindavan. On the topic of initiations for after Srila Prabhupada departs, the GBC had prepared only 2 questions to ask him. In Amoga Lila's video, he gives part of Srila Prabhupada's response to their first question. But he didn't say what the actual question was that the GBC had asked that Srila Prabhupada was responding to. So here's the question. Satsvarup asked, then our next question concerns initiations in the future, particularly at that time when you are no longer with us. We want to know how first and second initiation will be conducted. Note that the question was specifically asking how initiations would be conducted at that time when His divine grace would no longer be present in this world. Very specifically, this question was asking in regards to initiations for after Srila Prabhupada physically departed this world. This must be considered when analyzing Srila Prabhupada's response. Note also that in the entire meeting, in the May 28th meeting, Srila Prabhupada never did answer the question. On May 28th, Srila Prabhupada never answered and explained how he wanted the initiations to be conducted after he has departed. Yet, that was their number one of only 2 questions the GBC wanted to know about on this topic. And Srila Prabhupada did not answer that question on that day. Srila Prabhupada did respond to their question, but he didn't answer it that day. His response started with the words, after this is settled up, meaning that as of May 28th, Srila Prabhupada himself had not yet decided on the details as to how he wanted the initiations to be conducted after he had departed. Then Srila Prabhupada tells us what he will do after he has settled this. He said, after this is settled up, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating acharyas. What is an officiating acharya? Tamal Krishna asked Srila Prabhupada if an officiating acharya was a Ritvik acharya. And Srila Prabhupada gave his one and only definition, which was Ritvik, yes. Thus, in response to the GBC's question as to how initiations were to be conducted after Srila Prabhupada has departed, Srila Prabhupada stated clearly that as soon as he settles this up, he will then recommend some of the GBC men to act as what he defined as Ritviks. 5.5 weeks later, Srila Prabhupada has a letter written. And in the very first paragraph, it refers back to the May 28th meeting, specifically to when Srila Prabhupada said he would soon recommend some men to act as Ritviks. He then finalized their formal title as being Ritvik representatives of the Acharya. And then he gives the names of the first 11 Ritvik representatives. After giving those names, he then describes how the initiations are to be conducted. Thus, via the July 9th letter, Srila Prabhupada gave his formal written answer to the first question on this topic that the GBC asked him on May 28th. This point is most crucial to understanding what the real purpose of the July 9th letter was and for understanding this issue. Very clearly and specifically, the question the GBC asked him on May 28th was in regards to the initiations for after he has departed. And on May 28th, Srila Prabhupada said that once he has settled up those details, he will then give the names of those he selects to act as what he defined as Ritviks. And so 5.5 weeks later, in the July 9th letter, the letter refers back to that meeting on May 28th, to when Srila Prabhupada said he would recommend the men to act as Ritviks. This provides a very clear, straight line of evidence and a clear understanding that Srila Prabhupada wanted the Ritvik system for after he has departed. To reach this conclusion, we do not have to twist or bend anything or give a lofty, nebulous interpretation. The evidence draws a perfectly straight line, showing that this is what His divine grace really wanted. Later on in the May 28th conversation, Srila Prabhupada added that it would be on his order that one can become an actual guru. And he again reiterated this, but only by his order. During that meeting, Satsrup and Tamal had asked, whose disciples will they be? Srila Prabhupada's or the new guru's disciples? Well, these GBC men thought they were asking about the Ritviks, whom Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select. Srila Prabhupada gave his reply not about those Ritviks, but he replied in regards to the person or persons whom he will have given his order to become actual gurus. Thus he said they will be their disciples. This is where the GBC men got all confused, as they thought Srila Prabhupada was saying that the Ritviks would be actual gurus. No, that is wrong. And at the end of that part of the conversation, Srila Prabhupada gave his last clarifying statement as he said, when I order you become guru, he becomes regular guru, disciple of my disciple. In other words, Srila Prabhupada was saying that the person or persons that he will have given his order, his actual order to, that person or persons, they will become regular gurus and make their own disciples. What he did not state in his clarifying statement was that I shall soon select some of you to become Ritviks, and then on my disappearance, they will become regular gurus and initiate their own disciples. However, that is what the GBC wrongly misunderstood and mistakenly thought Srila Prabhupada was saying. However, until Srila Prabhupada gives his actual order to someone to become the next guru in our disciplic line, then the Ritvik system that he set up and authorized for after he has departed will remain. And Srila Prabhupada will continue to give the shelter of his initiations via that authorized system. With the Ritvik system, Srila Prabhupada's physical presence or involvement was no longer required. Srila Prabhupada had delegated every physical aspect of the initiation process. Amoga Lila and the GBC accepted the Ritvik system, as outlined in the July 9th letter, at least according to them, was bona fide. But instead of understanding that this was the system that Srila Prabhupada wanted in place for after he has departed, up until the point when he someday will give his order to someone to become an actual guru, they take the misinterpretation that the Ritvik system was only meant for while Srila Prabhupada's temporary earthly Vapu form was still presently living in this material world. However, with the Ritvik system, Srila Prabhupada's Vapu form can be lying very weak in his bed in Vrindavan, and yet he can be making disciples all over the world without being physically involved in the process at all. GBC accept that system was bona fide. However, the current GBC and their supporters claim that as soon as Srila Prabhupada's Vapu form ceased to live in this world, that the Ritvik system lost all of its spiritual potency and became totally bogus. I call this the Vapu Vada, the philosophy that teaches that what empowered Srila Prabhupada to give spiritual initiations without being physically involved in the process was his temporary earthly Vapu form. By default, this is what the GBC's philosophy has been. A Vapu Vada philosophy is a bogus and deviant philosophy. It is conditioned by mundane thinking and lacks spiritual understanding. That philosophy is based on a totally concocted and mundane idea that it was Srila Prabhupada's Vapu form that empowered the spiritual potency of his ability to give spiritual initiation. We, on the other hand, uphold the Vani Vada understanding. We proclaim that what empowered the spiritual aspects of the Ritvik representative of the Acharya system of initiations is the eternal Vani of the Guru. That system is empowered by Srila Prabhupada's teachings, by his eternal spirit soul. That system has not lost any of its spiritual potency just because Srila Prabhupada's temporary earthly Vapu form it no longer lives in this world. And his eternal soul is living in the spiritual world, engaged in the loving pastimes of Radha and Krishna. That system remains just as spiritually potent today as it did in 1977. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds in the video, Amoga Lila quotes from Sajjanatoshani by Srila Bhaktivedanta. The quote is, "The nature of an Apasampradaya, a Boga-specific line, is that they take an exceptional deed done in an exceptional situation of an exalted acharya and make it into a regular standard for all to follow. Amoga Lila's application of this quote is all wrong. The exceptional deed that Srila Prabhupada performed under exceptional circumstances is that His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, set up an ongoing Ritvik representative system in which he can continue to give the shelter of his diksha even after leaving this world. That system is the exceptional deed that the exalted Acharya Srila Prabhupada performed. To fulfill Srila Prabhupada's desire by following that system is not making that the exception a regular standard to follow, as Amoga Lila wrongly claims, but it is simply carrying out the exceptional deed that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to carry out. It is just fulfilling and executing that exceptional deed. However, there are other aspects of Srila Prabhupada but also performed that were also exceptions, such as a sannyasi giving initiation to unwed females. This he did due to the exceptional situation. Where Srila Bhaktivedanta instruction applies is to the current ISKCON gurus, who have turned that exception and other similar exceptional deeds by the exalted Acharya into a regular standard. Today, so many of ISKCON's sannyasi gurus initiate young unwed girls of marriageable age and accept the adoration and surrender of such young unwed girls. This is normally forbidden for a sannyasi in the renounced order, to accept unwed females as their direct surrendered disciples. Srila Prabhupada did this as an exception, and the GBC gurus have wrongly turned that exception into a regular standard. The ones who are deviating and creating an Apasampradaya are the GBC ordained so-called gurus in ISKCON. They're the ones trying to turn into regular standards the exceptions made by the truly exalted Acharya Srila Prabhupada. But to implement and follow the exceptional system that Srila Prabhupada set up to meet the needs of exceptional circumstances is not turning the exception he made into a standard. It is simply carrying out and implementing that exception that the great Acharya Srila Prabhupada set up. At 4 minutes and 34 seconds into the video, Amoga Lila talks about what he wrongly thinks was the origination of the ongoing Ritvik system. He puts forth the false claim that Krishnakant Desai is who started this idea. I have already addressed part of this at the beginning of this video rebuttal to Amoga Lila's June 1st video. While Amoga is speaking as if he is a great authority on this subject, the fact is he doesn't even know the basic history at all. What he says is wrong and misleading. Amoga and the others try to pin the origins of the idea of the ongoing Ritvik system on Krishnakant Desai and then point out that he isn't even an initiated member of ISKCON. They jump on this because they think it is a quick and easy way to discredit the entire Ritvik system. I have spent over a decade researching the history on this issue in much depth. And I write and give documentation and evidence of that history in my book, Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, The Definitive Analysis. There is too much detail that must be given to understand this properly, and I can't go into all of that in this video. So here, though, however, I will give a brief overview of the actual history regarding this. There were a small number of devotees who understood that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to continue with the Ritvik system after his departure, right from the very start. Jasodanandan Prabhu, who was a respected sannyasi at the time and was residing in 1977, he was residing in Vrindavan. And Gauridas Pandit Prabhu, who was in Srila Prabhupada's room along with Tamal Krishna when Srila Prabhupada spoke on this issue and when he dictated and crafted the July 9th letter that took place in multiple meetings. In my research, I found that the GBC had based their understanding that the 11 named Ritviks were to be gurus after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance on just one thing, and that was a totally flawed and misleading official GBC minutes of the May 28th meeting. The May 28th meeting was recorded, but the original tape was on quarter-inch reel-to-reel. That tape was sent off to the tape ministry and set on the shelf for many years. The GBC themselves did not have a copy of the tape or even a transcript of the meeting. After that meeting, one of the GBC men wrote down what would become the official GBC minutes of that meeting. He wrote it down from his own memory of what he thought Srila Prabhupada had supposedly said on this topic. Or more correctly stated, he wrote down what he wanted to hear or think what Srila Prabhupada had said, and not really what Srila Prabhupada actually said. Since the meeting was recorded on tape, today we can compare what the GBC minutes state. The GBC minutes state what Srila Prabhupada supposedly had said and what he actually said. And we can plainly see that the GBC's official minutes of that meeting were totally flawed and completely misleading. And most unfortunately, it was that very flawed report that the GBC based their concocted multi-guru system on. Their system is not at all based on what Srila Prabhupada himself actually stated, but was based on what one GBC man wrongly thought Srila Prabhupada had said. And he wrote it down, and that became the official GBC minutes for that meeting. For example, what Srila Prabhupada actually said on May 28th was that when he was asked about initiations for after he has departed, Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would act as what Srila Prabhupada defined as Ritviks. Then later on in the conversation, separately, he said that on his order, that person whom he will someday give his order to, that person will become an actual regular guru. What the GBC's report stated was that when asked about initiations for after he departs, Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would become regular gurus on Prabhupada's disappearance. That official GBC report did not mention anything at all about Srila Prabhupada selecting Ritviks. And it replaced Srila Prabhupada saying that it was on his order that one will become an actual guru to on his disappearance. Srila Prabhupada never mentioned his disappearance in that meeting. He said it would be on my order, but by my order. When I order, that person that Srila Prabhupada will someday give that order to, he will become an actual regular guru and initiate his own disciples. But the flawed GBC report changed Srila Prabhupada's words on his order to on his disappearance. And it was this erroneous flaw in the official GBC minutes of that meeting that totally misled the GBC in 1977 and ever since. It was based on that totally misleading report that when Srila Prabhupada gave the list of 11 Ritviks, that the GBC wrongly concluded that this just wasn't a list of Ritviks, but it was a list of men which the flawed GBC report said would become actual gurus on his disappearance. But in the actual July 9th letter itself, where the 11 Ritviks are named, that letter says absolutely nothing about these men becoming actual gurus. It is a list of Ritvik representatives of the Acharya. And in that letter, the Ritvik duties and the Ritvik system for initiations are described. There is absolutely no mention by Srila Prabhupada of those men ever becoming regular gurus. Yet the GBC proclaimed that the 11 men named in that letter, who were named as Ritviks, were to become the first new gurus for ISKCON after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. So where did that idea come from? There is absolutely no quote, either verbal or written, where Srila Prabhupada himself states that these men are to become regular gurus on his disappearance or at any other time. The only basis that the GBC had in making that claim was the totally flawed and misleading official GBC minutes of the May 28th meeting, which was written by one of the GBC men And that stated that Srila Prabhupada would soon select men who would become regular gurus on his disappearance. Yet what Srila Prabhupada actually said on the May 28th meeting was that he would soon select men to act as officiating acharyas, which he then gave the definition that they would be Ritviks. And that was all that Srila Prabhupada selected those 11 men to be. That is all the July 9th letter states, and it only states the Ritvik duties and that Ritvik system. Regarding the July 9th letter, that letter was addressed to not just the GBC, but was also addressed to the temple presidents and was supposed to have been sent out to all the temples in July of 1977. But the vast majority of the temple presidents and all the rank and file members, they had no knowledge that that letter even existed for nearly 10 years. The GBC purposefully kept that letter secret and did not openly share it with the other devotees. For me personally, the first time I read it was in 1996, 19 years after it was written. Why did the GBC keep that most important historical document, that letter? Why did they keep it secret and not share it with everyone? In 1978, the GBC proclaimed that Srila Prabhupada had selected 11 men to become the 11 new acharyas for ISKCON. Obviously, the names of those 11 men came from the July 9th letter. The reason the GBC chose not to share that letter with the rest of the devotees was because in that letter, Srila Prabhupada only named these men to become his Ritvik representatives. And he only outlined their Ritvik duties and only described the Ritvik system for initiations. Yet nowhere in that letter, the very letter which Srila Prabhupada gives their names, does Srila Prabhupada mention anything at all about these men becoming actual gurus after his disappearance or at any other time. But the GBC had their official GBC minutes of the May 28th meeting. In fact, that's all they had at that time regarding what they thought Srila Prabhupada said were those official GBC minutes. And those minutes, that report, falsely stated that Srila Prabhupada would soon give the names of men who would become regular gurus on Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. The GBC men became totally misled by that flawed report. And they wrongly assumed that the 11 men Srila Prabhupada named to be only Ritviks were actually the men who the flawed report said he would name to be regular gurus after he departs. Since in the July 9th letter, it doesn't say anything at all about these men becoming actual gurus. The GBC concluded that the letter that Srila Prabhupada had dictated and signed is what was totally misleading. They assumed that it was Srila Prabhupada's letter that was misleading, and they concluded that if the devotees got hold of that letter and read it for themselves, they would be totally misled into thinking that Srila Prabhupada only wanted them to remain as Ritviks and that he had not selected them to become gurus. So to keep devotees from supposedly being misled by Srila Prabhupada's letter, the GBC chose to keep that letter hidden and not let the rest of the devotees see it. But what the real truth is, it was not Srila Prabhupada's letter that was flawed and misleading. It was the official GBC report of the May 28th meeting. That is what was actually flawed and misleading. And the entire GBC became totally misled by that flawed report. What most of the supporters of the current GBC Guru system do not realize is that there is absolutely no direct verbal or written instruction by Srila Prabhupada where he ever said that the 11 men he appointed to act as Ritvik representatives were to ever become actual gurus, Diksha gurus. The entire guru system that the GBC have concocted is not at all based on any direct instruction or order given by ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Again, what many devotees are not aware of is that after Srila Prabhupada departed, the GBC chose to ban access not to just the July 9th letter, but the GBC chose to ban access to all of Srila Prabhupada's letters. By the mid-1980s, the BBT had made microfilms of all of Srila Prabhupada's letters and documents as a way of archiving and preserving them. Then in 1985, one nice Prabhupada disciple, Sulochan, who I knew personally, was able to get a copy of those microfilms with all of Srila Prabhupada's letters. As he went through the thousands of letters, he found the July 9th letter. This was the very letter that gave the names of who the GBC had been claiming were the 11 new acharyas for ISKCON. Yet when Sulochan read the letter for himself, he saw that Srila Prabhupada had only selected these men to act as his Ritvik representatives. In that very letter where Srila Prabhupada gives their names, Srila Prabhupada said absolutely nothing at all of these men ever becoming actual Diksha Gurus. Many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples had questioned from the very beginning the idea that Srila Prabhupada actually selected those 11 men to become his successor gurus, because many of us knew they were not at all pure devotees. Many of them had strong materialistic desires. Many displayed non-Vaishnav behaviors, especially in their private dealings with their godbrothers. In private, some of these gurus would say nasty things even about the other gurus. In private with their godbrothers, some of these gurus would say that none of the other gurus were qualified. Only they were. But if one of the rank and file devotees criticized the new gurus as not being qualified, they were dealt with harshly and even kicked out of Srila Prabhupada's mission. What an hypocrisy. Many of us could see that their system was corrupt because those men were not pure. So a lot of us question if what the GBC had been telling us was the truth or not. And yet none of us had access to any evidence. By 1985, several of the 11 new acharyas had serious fall downs, engaging in illicit sex, drugs, and much more. It wasn't until 1985 that Sulochan got access to the actual letter where Srila Prabhupada gave the names of the 11 so-called new acharyas. He and others began to now refer to it as the July 9th letter. And yet in that letter, Srila Prabhupada only stated that those 11 men were to act as his Ritvik representatives, where those who were thus initiated by those 11 would become Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples. And that was all that the letter stated. Starting in 1985, Sulochan began passing out copies of that letter to other devotees. And slowly, starting with just a small growing handful of devotees, as they read that letter and the letter began to get passed around, they concluded that the GBC got this issue entirely all wrong. They concluded that it was the Ritvik system that Srila Prabhupada actually wanted, and that he never ordered those men to become actual Diksha Gurus. Sulochan did more research into this, and he began writing a book he called Guru Business to document his work. However, as soon as the book was published, he was shot in the head and murdered in cold blood just down the street from the Los Angeles temple. He was murdered by another devotee from the New Vrindavan community. That devotee was arrested just a few days later in Ohio as he was packing up to flee the country with the $8,000 he had been paid for his services. That money also came from the leaders of the New Vrindavan community. In this way, Sulochan had made the ultimate sacrifice. It was his finding of the July 9th letter and his sharing it with others that brought this Ritvik issue out into the open. Because the GBC had kept the July 9th letter secret. They kept it to themselves. This is why it wasn't until the mid to late 1980s that slowly more and more devotees began to conclude that the GBC got this all wrong and that Srila Prabhupada had only wanted that he remain as ISKCON's only Diksha Guru via the Ritvik system. This, what I have outlined, these are the real historical facts regarding this issue. At 5 minutes and 30 seconds, Lila goes into some wild, insane rant, belittling and dismissing the idea of recognizing Srila Prabhupada as the current Guru of the universe, Vishva Guru. He belittles the title of Vishva Guru as less than that of Jagat Guru, which is normally translated as the Guru of the world. In 2023, I attended the program celebrating Srila Prabhupada's appearance day at the Radha Damodar Mandir. Panchagoda Prabhu, the temple president of ISKCON's Krishna Balaram temple, was also there. At that program, a most senior member of the Gaudiya Vaishnava community, Puldas Das Babaji Maharaj, proposed giving Srila Prabhupada the title of Vishva Guru, Guru of the universe, as a way of distinguishing Srila Prabhupada and honoring him. So many men had been given the title Jagat Guru. Pul Das Babaji proposed giving Srila Prabhupada the title of Vishva Guru as a way of giving Srila Prabhupada higher respect and honor, the higher respect and honor that he deserved. His idea was to recognize and distinguish Srila Prabhupada's level and importance as being far greater than that of the others who hold the title Jagat Guru. Therefore, out of his respect for Srila Prabhupada, he suggested this title of Vishva Guru be given to Srila Prabhupada. And now, by the grace of Madhu Pandit Prabhu's efforts, other camps have come forward and have agreed to also give Srila Prabhupada this most highly respected and revered title. Yet Amoga Lila is simply ridiculing this, mocking the idea, and mocking the very word Vishva. Vishvambar, Vishva Rup. This word is used in the Sanskrit. It means universe. In a very disrespectful way, Amoga Lila totally made fun of and dismissed the great respect and honor those other camps and the leaders of the Gaudiya Vaishnava community have bestowed upon Srila Prabhupada. Amoga Lila has exposed himself as a fool by such demeaning behavior. At 7 minutes into the video, Amoga Lila likens the Ritvik system to that of what he calls the Abrahmana religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. He points out that Christians and Muslims stop with one guru and one book. And he accused the supporters of the Ritvik system of also stopping with one guru, Srila Prabhupada, and only his books. If Amoga Lila doesn't want to accept Srila Prabhupada and his books, then he should get the hell out of ISKCON. Go find another mission to belong to, or start his own. The real ISKCON is Srila Prabhupada's mission. And those who are the real members of the real ISKCON will only accept Srila Prabhupada as their one and only Diksha Guru. And they will accept only his books as the foundation of their spiritual learning. If someone wants to accept someone else's books as their main understanding, they are the ones who must remove themselves from Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON mission. Regarding the Christians, for example, of course the Christians only accept Jesus as their Savior. That is what Christians are. By definition, they are the followers of Christ, who accept only Jesus Christ as their Savior. Likewise, the Prabhupadanugas are those Vaishnavas who accept Srila Prabhupada as their Savior and one and only Diksha Guru. That is supposed to be what the real ISKCON mission is meant to be. Srila Prabhupada is ISKCON's founder Acharya, the one and only Diksha Guru for ISKCON. Amoga Lila claims that supporters of Srila Prabhupada's Ritvik system are following in the footsteps of what he terms Abrahmana religions, What we are actually following is the teachings and desire of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the most exalted Vaishnava Brahman. In the same way, the followers of Madhva Acharya accept Madhva as their main teacher and their actual savior. They accept that it is his books, his writings and teachings, who gives them their spiritual realization and frees them from the spiritual world. They accept Madhva Acharya as the one who is actually giving the real Diksha. Does Amoga Lila also consider the followers of Madhva Acharya to be Abrahmanas? Ramanuja followers do the same with Ramanuja, etc. We are the followers of Srila Prabhupada, the Prabhupadanugas, and we are proud of this. We take spiritual pride that we follow the system that he has set up for us to follow, and that we accept him and his teachings and his books. That is who we are, and we are proud of this. At around 9 minutes and 10 seconds, Amoga gives a partial quote of a letter Srila Prabhupada wrote to Hamsadutta Prabhu. This was written in 1969. In this letter, Srila Prabhupada discussed his desire to hold various exams, from Bhakti Shastri up to Bhaktivedanta exams. And he wrote, in 1969, he wrote, those possessing the title of Bhaktivedanta will be allowed to initiate disciples. Maybe by 1975, all of my disciples will be allowed to initiate and increase the numbers of the generations. That is my program. And yes, this was clearly what Srila Prabhupada wanted. And in 1969, only 3 years after he started ISKCON, and Hamsadutta had only been a devotee for 1 or 2 years at that time, Srila Prabhupada saw that his early disciples were making so much advancement so quickly that at that time he thought that in another 6 years, they would be able to take their own disciples by 1975. But the fact is, his disciples did not continue to make such quick advancement. And by 1975 and later, even though Srila Prabhupada again mentions these exams, he no longer taught that those who pass the higher exams would be allowed to take their own disciples. Further, in April of 1977, when the very same Hamsadutta attempted to take his own disciples, Srila Prabhupada said, no, you become guru, but you must be qualified first of all. Then you become. He criticized Hamsadutta's attempt in April of 1977, saying, what is the use of producing rascal gurus? In 1969, he had told the very same Hamsadutta that by 1975, he should have become so advanced that he could take his own disciples by then. But obviously, Hamsadutta and Prabhupada's other disciples did not continue to advance so quickly. In 1977, he was referring to that same Hamsadutta that he would become a rascal guru if he tried to take his own disciples because he had not yet become pure. Then during that same 22nd of April conversation, Tamal then told Srila Prabhupada that he had assessed himself and all of Srila Prabhupada's disciples. And Tamal concluded that they were all still conditioned souls and that none of them were qualified to be guru. And Srila Prabhupada agreed with that harsh assessment. Srila Prabhupada said, and this is 22nd of April, 1977, yes, I shall choose some guru. I shall say, now you become acharya. You become authorized. I am waiting for that. You become all acharya. I retire completely. But the training must be complete. Despite writing the letter in 1969, thinking that by 1975, his disciples would become so advanced that they can become actual gurus and take their own disciples. When the year 1975 came, Srila Prabhupada no longer mentions this. And even another 2 years later, Srila Prabhupada agrees that none of his disciples were yet qualified. And he clearly stated in April of 1977 that he is still waiting to give any of his disciples the order to become actual guru. Therefore, we can see that we, his disciples, did not advance as far and as quickly as he thought that we would back in 1969, when many of the early members had so much of his direct personal association. Amoga Lila then quotes a letter Srila Prabhupada wrote to Tushta Krishna, dated the 2nd of December, 1975. Amoga Lila only gives partial quote, which is misleading. What Srila Prabhupada wrote, the actual quote is, "Keep trained up very rigidly. Then you are bona fide guru, and you can accept disciples on the same principle. But as a matter of etiquette, it is the custom that during the lifetime of your spiritual master, you bring the prospective disciples to him, and in his absence or disappearance, you can accept disciples without any limitation." The partial quote that Amoga gave, it misleadingly seemed that Srila Prabhupada was giving Tushta Krishna the order to become a guru after Srila Prabhupada departs. But with that full instruction, we see that Srila Prabhupada prefaced this with the need for he or anyone to become rigidly trained up to the point of becoming a bona fide guru. It is not that the only criteria is the disappearance of one's guru before one become guru. Then any nonsense fallen disciple of Srila Prabhupada could automatically become guru and take their own disciples on Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. But the most important criteria is that one has to be fully and completely and rigidly trained up as well. Without that, then Srila Prabhupada said, what is the use of creating some rascal gurus? And then for some minutes, Amoga goes on to give a number of quotes where Srila Prabhupada talked of devotees becoming Diksha Gurus. However, as we can see by this letter to Tushta Krishna, and in Srila Prabhupada's reaction to Hamsadutta's attempt to take his own disciples in April of 77, the most important criteria that His Divine Grace emphasized was that before one can be given such an order by one's guru, one has to be fully trained and fully qualified first. At 12 minutes and 45 seconds, Amoga quotes from a letter Srila Prabhupada wrote to Kirtanananda, January 25th, 1972, which Amoga interprets one way. I see the quote in a totally different way. Srila Prabhupada wrote, "Regarding your question about the disciplic succession coming down from Arjuna, it is just like I have got my disciples, so in the future, these many disciples may have many branches of disciplic succession." The way I understand this quote is that Srila Prabhupada is saying that when some of his disciples someday would, when they become actually qualified, that it would not be within Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON centers, but they would be required to open their own separate ashrams and form their own branches of the disciplic succession. Within ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada is rightfully the only bona fide Diksha Guru. At 14 minutes and 58 seconds, Amoga Lila mentions how the Ritvik supporters uphold the July 9th letter as being Srila Prabhupada's final order on the topic of initiations for after he departs. And then he says that the supporters accept this only because Krishnakant Desai said so. Oh God, what a foolish statement. As I have stated, Krishnakant Desai got involved with this issue many years later. And for me personally, I have never read his final order book. Therefore, I have no idea what the reasoning Krishnakanta Desai gave for his coming to that conclusion, that the July 9th letter was the final order. But I have done my own independent research on this topic, spanning many years, from which I have written my own 1,100-page comprehensive book on this topic, and I reached that same conclusion because that is what the hard evidence leaves us with no other intelligent and informed conclusion to reach. It has nothing to do with whatever Krishnakant Desai wrote. It has to do with the honest historical facts and evidence. I cannot enter into a proper analysis of the May 28th meeting here in this video. I have, however, addressed this extensively in both my book and in an online presentation on this topic. However, I have stated the following before, and that is that there is a straight line drawn from the May 28th meeting when the GBC asked Srila Prabhupada how were the initiations to be conducted after Srila Prabhupada departed, and Srila Prabhupada's response that he would soon select officiating acharyas, which he defined as being Ritviks. Then in the July 9th letter, that letter refers to that meeting when Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select Ritviks, and then he gives the list of the 11 first Ritviks. Thus, the July 9th letter is Srila Prabhupada's written and signed answer to their question regarding how initiations were to be performed after his disappearance. It is a straight line. There's no bends or twists, no gray iffy areas. It is a straight line that is drawn that clearly shows us that the July 9th letter is his final order or final written answer to the question regarding initiations for after he has departed. As I said, since I have never read the final order by Krishnakant Desai, I have no idea what evidence he has given for his own conclusion. But this is briefly how I reached that conclusion myself. Now we come to 15 minutes and 29 seconds into Amoga's video, where he brings up that Srila Prabhupada had spoke on this topic even after the July 9th letter. Therefore, he is arguing that the July 9th letter was not his final order on this issue. And with that said, he then brings up the conversation that took place on the 18th of October, 1977. Oh my God. Amoga gives the same lack of good intelligence or reasoning that the GBC have been giving since they first put forth their foot in their mouth and came up with this foolish interpretation of this conversation. The first time I heard their interpretation was around 2008. And I could not stop laughing at how ridiculous their interpretation was and how lacking their understanding of this issue was. The point that the GBC make about this conversation is they began claiming that it was on this day that Srila Prabhupada stopped giving Diksha. They boldly claimed that it was on this day that His Divine Grace gave His order to the 11 Ritviks to become the actual Diksha Gurus. The logic they give for this is totally and laughably flawed. Let me explain. Here is what was said on October 18th, 1977, Prabhupada. So I have deputed some of you to initiate. Tamal Krishna. Yes, actually, yes, Srila Prabhupada. So I think Jayapataka can do that if he likes. I have already deputed. Tell him, Tamal Krishna, yes. Prabhupada. So deputies, Jayapataka's name was there? Bhagavan. It is already on there, Srila Prabhupada. His name was on that list. Prabhupada. So I depute him to do this at Mayapur, and you may go with him. I stop for the time being. Is that all right? Tamal Krishna. Stop doing what, Srila Prabhupada? Prabhupada. This initiation. I have deputed my disciples. Is it clear or not? So this is from the room conversation, 18th of October, 1977 in Vrindavan. The GBC's argument is based on several assumptions. One assumption, their main assumption, is that the Ritvik process had been going on since July 9th, when Srila Prabhupada appointed the 11 Ritviks to initiate on his behalf. So when Srila Prabhupada said that he is now stopping this initiation in October, they argued that the only thing left for Srila Prabhupada to stop was that of giving Diksha, since they argue he had already stopped performing the Ritvik aspects of the initiation back in July. And yes, at first glance, some may think that the GBC have a valid point. but it takes only a little knowledge of what the Ritvik system is and a knowledge of the situation during this 18th of October conversation, and we see that the GBC's whole idea falls apart. But before we go there, their idea also falls apart just based on the words that were spoken. Srila Prabhupada speaks in past tense. He says that he has already deputed Jayapataka Swami, that his name was there in that list of 11 Ritvik names in that letter, which we now call the July 9th letter. The only aspect of the initiations that Srila Prabhupada is referring to and during this conversation is in regard to what he has already deputed Jayapataka Swami and the others to do in that list of the July 9th letter. And the only things that Srila Prabhupada had already deputed those men to do were the Ritvik aspects of the initiation process. That is all that Srila Prabhupada had in the past already deputed Jayapataka Swami to do. And then Srila Prabhupada said, so I depute him to do this at Mayapur. What does this refer to? The only aspect of the initiations that Srila Prabhupada had been referring to during this conversation are the Ritvik aspects that he had already deputed Jayapataka and the other Ritviks to do in that July 9th list. No time in the conversation was the aspect of giving of the actual diksha ever mentioned. The word this is an adjective that is pointing to a subject that is already part of the conversation. If Srila Prabhupada had intended to be ordering Jayapataka to do something different than what he had already deputed him in the past to do, then Prabhupada would need to explain what that other thing was that he was now deputing him to do, and not just use a nondescript word, this, allegedly pointing to something outside of the conversation that has not at all been mentioned yet. If someone wants to argue that the word this refers to the giving of diksha, someone else could argue that this refers to performing the fire yajna, or chanting on the beads, or giving the names, or just about any other thing that was not yet mentioned in that conversation. No, the word this is just an adjective that points to something that was already being discussed within the conversation. It specifically refers to what he had already in the past deputed Jayapataka Swami to do. And again, the only thing that he had in the past deputed him to do was to perform the Ritvik aspects. Srila Prabhupada then says, I am stopping for the time being. Tamal asks, stop doing what, Srila Prabhupada? Again, Srila Prabhupada uses the same pointing adjective word, this, by saying, this initiation, I have deputed my disciples. Is it clear or not? He uses the words, this initiation. Again, how can this point to something that was never at all mentioned in the course of the conversation? The only aspects of the initiation that Srila Prabhupada was referring to during that conversation was what he had already in the past deputed Jayapataka and the Ritviks to do, which was to perform the Ritvik aspects. And to make it clear, Srila Prabhupada's full point was, this initiation, I have deputed my disciples. Again, Srila Prabhupada used past tense, where this is pointing to what he has already in the past deputed those men to do. Both the words have and deputed are past tense. Thus, the words this initiation can only be referring to that which Srila Prabhupada had in the past in the July 9th letter deputed those men to do. Yet the GBC claim that the words this initiation is to somehow pointing to something that was never even mentioned in the entire conversation, which was the giving of actual diksha. This is absurd. It makes no linguistic sense. Contrary to what the GBC claim, Srila Prabhupada is saying that he has stopped being involved in the Ritvik aspects of the initiation. But wait, The GBC claimed that Srila Prabhupada had already stopped performing the Ritvik aspects via the July 9th letter. Therefore, they argue that this could not be what Srila Prabhupada was referring to in October. They argue that it also makes no sense for Srila Prabhupada to now say he is stopping something that he has already stopped doing months before. Thus, they argue that the only thing left for him to now stop doing in October was to stop giving the actual Diksha. However, while this may sound like a reasonable argument at first glance, with just a little basic knowledge of understanding of what the Ritvik process really was or is, and what the situation was on the 18th of October, we find their argument totally collapses. Let me explain. In the July 9th letter, it states that previously temple presidents would send their recommendations to Srila Prabhupada. But with the Ritvik process, those recommendations will now be sent to the nearest Ritvik. When the recommendations used to be sent to Srila Prabhupada would have to decide if he would chant on the beads and give the names, or if he would delegate those aspects. And if so, he would then decide and determine who he would delegate those aspects to, etc. But once the Ritvik process was followed, all such decisions would be automatically carried out by that Ritvik process. There were now designated Ritviks in various parts of the world, and the temple presidents would send their recommendations to the nearest Ritvik. And that Ritvik would execute their assigned Ritvik duties. In this way, Srila Prabhupada would no longer be physically involved in the process. He would no longer be involved in making any of this decisions as to who, how, or where. Now let's apply that understanding of the Ritvik process to this 18th of October incident. The GBC men have brought to Srila Prabhupada's attention this Bengali man's request to be initiated by Srila Prabhupada. And it is Srila Prabhupada who is the one who is still having to determine which Ritvik should be handling this and where. The underlying assumption by the GBC is that Srila Prabhupada had already stopped the Ritvik aspects back in July, and that the only thing he could possibly be referring to stopping in October would be the giving of actual Diksha. But when we understand what the Ritvik process actually is, we can clearly see that in this case, the Ritvik process as described in the July 9th letter was not yet being followed. It was not yet being implemented. If it had been, then the entire issue regarding this man would have been handled by the Ritvik process, and it would not have ever been brought to Srila Prabhupada's attention at all, where he was still having to handle it. If the Ritvik process had been followed, and this man had made his request to, say, one of the GBC men, then that GBC man would have to inquire from that man's temple president if the temple president considered him qualified. And that temple president would then give his recommendation to the nearest Ritvik, who would then handle all the other aspects that Srila Prabhupada had already in the past deputed them to do. And thus, no one would have been involving Srila Prabhupada and asking him to make the decisions regarding the initiation of this Bengali man. This completely nullifies the GBC's entire argument regarding this incident. Their assumption was based on their lack of understanding of what the Ritvik process actually is. Once you understand what the process is, then you can easily see that as of October 18th, the Ritvik process had not yet been properly implemented. So it wasn't that Srila Prabhupada had already stopped performing the Ritvik aspects in July, and now in October, all that he could be stopping would be giving of the Diksha, as clearly on the 18th of October, the GBC had not yet properly implemented the Ritvik system. It isn't that on this day, October 18th, that Srila Prabhupada was giving his order to the Ritviks to now become actual gurus. Instead, with just a little knowledge, we can see that it was on this day that Srila Prabhupada was ordering these men to now implement that Ritvik system and to no longer keep coming to him and pressing him into making such decisions and involving him. The reason why the GBC came up with this interpretation decades later is because the supporters of the Ritvik system had long argued that Srila Prabhupada never gave his actual order to any of the 11 Ritviks to become Diksha Gurus. On May 28th, Srila Prabhupada had said that it was on his order that one can be an actual Guru. The supporters of the Ritvik process had been pointing out for many years that Prabhupada never gave such an order after that time. So years later, someone found this conversation and they thought, this is it. This is when Srila Prabhupada gave his actual order for the Ritviks to become actual Gurus. But in reality, this is when Srila Prabhupada gave his order for the selected men to now start the Ritvik process. Amoga Lila, in an effort to further argue that Srila Prabhupada was only referring to deputing these men to be actual Gurus, he gives one dictionary definition of the word depute, which states, appoint or instruct someone to perform a task for which he is responsible. Then Amoga jumps all over this word responsible and claims that this is proof that Srila Prabhupada was deputing the Ritviks to now be responsible for the entire initiation, meaning they were now responsible for giving the actual Diksha. Obviously, English is not Amoga Lila's first language, and his claim is outright foolish. What has Srila Prabhupada in the past already deputed these men to do? To perform the Ritvik aspects, period. That is all the July 9th list deputes them to do. When one is deputed to do something, yes, it is a fact that they are now responsible for carrying out what they were specifically deputed to do. But the only thing Srila Prabhupada deputed those men to do was to perform the Ritvik aspects of the initiation process, period. He had not deputed them to do anything more. Therefore, they were only responsible for carrying out the Ritvik aspects. It wasn't that Srila Prabhupada had deputed them to be responsible for anything and everything under the sun. Yes, when one is deputized, he becomes responsible for carrying out what he was deputized to do. No more and no less. Srila Prabhupada never deputed them to give the actual Diksha initiation. Thus, Amoga Lila's claim that because one dictionary definition of the word depute uses the word responsible, he twists that into arguing that they were now responsible for giving Diksha. It is a foolish misunderstanding and a total misuse of the word. Another dictionary online gives the definition as to appoint one's substitute, representative, or agent. That definition fits perfectly to what they were deputed to do as Ritvik representatives, to act on Srila Prabhupada's behalf as his representative or agent to perform the Ritvik aspects. And one last comment on this incident. Amoga Lila and the GBC want us to think that with this conversation, Srila Prabhupada is giving his direct order to Jayapataka Swami and the other Ritviks to now initiate their own disciples. This Bengali man had requested to be initiated as Srila Prabhupada's disciple, and the GBC want us to think that Srila Prabhupada was sending Jayapataka Swami to Mayapur to initiate that Bengali man as Jayapataka's own disciple. They want us to accept that Srila Prabhupada dictated that this man must now surrender his life to Jayapataka Swami and accept him as his eternal guru. The GBC want us to accept that Srila Prabhupada doesn't even consider that according to Shastra, this man must be the one who makes his own decision in this regard. The GBC want us to believe that Srila Prabhupada is just dictating this man's eternal fate, dictating who his eternal guru must be. This idea lacks all credibility. It is foolish. as I pointed out, that would go directly against Shastra that teaches that it is the potential disciple who must make his own decision, who he will accept as his guru. It is not up to even Srila Prabhupada to dictate this. And a godbrother of mine who knew that Bengali man said this man has always understood that he was initiated as Srila Prabhupada's direct disciple. So then are we to, so then are the GBC wanting us to accept that Srila Prabhupada sent Jaipataka to initiate this man as Jaipataka's own disciple without even telling the man? That Srila Prabhupada was wanting Jaipataka to trick the man into unknowingly becoming Jaipataka's disciple? Again, this is absurd. In 1977, that was not the understanding of this October 18th conversation. They never went and told that man that he must now accept Jaipataka as his guru. Rather, at that time in 1977, that man understood that Jaipataka was performing the ceremony on behalf of Srila Prabhupada, and that he was for a fact initiated as Srila Prabhupada's direct disciple. That was the understanding at the time in 1977. It was only years later that the GBC came up with their concocted and ridiculous idea that Srila Prabhupada was supposedly ordering Jaipataka and the other Ritviks to become actual gurus on the 18th of October. The entire premise of the GBC's misinterpretation of this conversation crumbles into dust on any proper attempt to analyze it. And something that needs to be said every now and then is that every evidence that the supporters of the GBC multi-guru system give in support of their concocted guru system is that they have never given one single reference that is a direct and clear and explicit instruction where Srila Prabhupada, without any doubt, clearly states that the GBC, what the GBC claim that Srila Prabhupada was saying. All the references they give are fuzzy or grayish, a bit muddy and totally unclear, indirect references that require a touch of speculation and imagination along with a lot of twisting and bending by the GBC to make it sound like solid proof of their system, like the October 18th conversation. There is no direct or clear statement made by Srila Prabhupada where he explicitly says he is no longer giving Diksha. And even though the GBC claimed that it was with this conversation that he was giving his order to the Ritviks to now become Diksha Gurus, there is no such direct, explicit, and clear statement given by Srila Prabhupada. Their so-called proof relies solely on their speculative imagination and twisting and bending. The same with the 11 men Srila Prabhupada had selected as his Ritvik representatives. In the letter where Srila Prabhupada gives their names, Srila Prabhupada never says anything at all about these men ever becoming actual gurus. While the GBC claim that this is what Srila Prabhupada wanted, they are unable to give an exact, clear quote, written or verbal, where Srila Prabhupada clearly states this. It is just the GBC who twist and bend the words that Srila Prabhupada said and reshape them, and then declare that those twisted words are proof of what Srila Prabhupada wanted. This has been true with all of the GBC's arguments, that where they try to provide some sort of proof that their concocted multi-guru system is what Srila Prabhupada wanted. Also, the GBC have never given one single quote where Srila Prabhupada even discussed an ISKCON in the future that would have multiple gurus or masters. There are no quotes by Srila Prabhupada where he ever mentions a time when another guru or guru would act as Diksha Guru within his mission. To have multiple masters in one organization is unprecedented, especially considering that His Divine Grace had established the GBC as the ultimate managing authority for all of ISKCON after his departure. To introduce multiple guru masters into that system of management that Srila Prabhupada set up for ISKCON has been a major problem since day one. Where do multiple guru masters fit in? Who is the higher authority? The GBC or the spiritual masters? How is this to be set up? And how is it to function? This has been a major problem since day one. That problem exists because His divine grace never gave one single instruction in this regard. It is enough to make devotees question then, did Srila Prabhupada really want such a guru system? After talking about the 18th of October conversation, Amoga Lila brings up November 2nd, 1977, and a conversation that Srila Prabhupada had with a government official named Krishna Bajaj. Mainly the man was wanting Srila Prabhupada to appoint an Indian to take over ISKCON after he departs. He asked Srila Prabhupada if there will be 1 man, 5 to 10 to 20 men. And Srila Prabhupada says that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's order is that everyone should become a master. And yes, if you preach and tell everyone about Krishna, you become a Pata Pradasaka Guru or the Shiksha Guru, but not necessarily the Diksha Guru. In 1975, Srila Prabhupada wrote, the GBC should all be the instructor gurus. I am the initiator guru, and you shall be the instructor guru by teaching what I am teaching and doing what I am doing. This is not a title, but you must actually come to this platform. This I want. This is from 4th of August, 1975, in a letter to Madhudvisa. Srila Prabhupada wanted the GBC men to become Shiksha Gurus, and he is the one Diksha Guru. Amoga Lila, however, points out that after this man leaves and Srila Prabhupada is talking with his disciples, Srila Prabhupada told his disciples, leaders mean one who has become first-class disciple. He is leader. Evam parampara praptam. One who is perfectly following. Because Srila Prabhupada quoted about the parampara, meaning the disciplic succession, and with the Indian man, he was saying that all his followers were masters. Amoga claims that this statement was Srila Prabhupada's order authorizing all his disciples to become Diksha Gurus. But again, even within the reference being quoted, we can see that there is a criteria attached before one can become Guru. Srila Prabhupada said that such leader means one who becomes first-class disciple and one who is perfectly following. We cannot take just one statement, but we must consider other related statements Srila Prabhupada made on this topic. On the 22nd of April 1977, just 3 weeks before Srila Prabhupada announced he would be leaving us soon, he had said that he is still waiting to give an order to even one disciple to become Guru because no one was yet qualified. Srila Prabhupada said that one has to be first class fully trained first. Until then, he cannot give any such order. Only 3 weeks before he announced he was leaving soon, Srila Prabhupada declared that none of his disciples were yet qualified or fully trained to become actual Diksha Gurus. Taken together, I see no contradiction in what Srila Prabhupada is saying here in this conversation and what he had said before. At the same time, I do not agree with Amoga's assessment. At 22 minutes into Amoga's video, he gives a quote from Gopal Bhatta's Hari Bhakti Vilas 174, where it is stated, prospective guru and his disciple should live together for 1 year before initiation. Thus, they come to understand each other's nature. There is no other way to ascertain this. Amoga uses this verse to discredit the Ritvik representative system, even saying that the Vigraha deity of Srila Prabhupada cannot make the assessment of a new disciple. But wait, what about the current so-called gurus in ISKCON who have tens to even hundreds of thousands of disciples? How many ISKCON gurus live with their prospective disciples for 1 year before they give them initiation? How many of their tens of thousands of disciples has the guru personally met and personally studied? How many of their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of disciples have they cultivated a personal relationship with? They are not Krishna, who can expand themselves into unlimited forms, where each wife has and each devotee can have a personal relationship with them, as Krishna has. If the Ritvik system is to be considered bogus on this basis, then most of the GBC's gurus are also just as bogus. Aside from that, even among the vast majority of Srila Prabhupada's own direct disciples, only a small handful had direct personal dealings with him while he was present. Many disciples of Srila Prabhupada never even saw Srila Prabhupada in person, yet the GBC accepts all those initiations were bona fide. Up to now, I have addressed points that Amoga Lila made in his video. Now I want to make a very important point of my own. Consider the following question that penetrates to the very core of the GBC multi-guru system. Who authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus? At the beginning of my rebuttal to Amoga Lila's 1st of June 2025 video, I had noted that one important question concerning this issue is the GBC ordained gurus in ISKCON, are they actually authorized and bona fide gurus? Srila Prabhupada teaches that it is only by the direct order given by one's own guru that one can become a guru. The following is from the 28th of October, 1975, while taking questions after Bhagavad Gita class. An Indian man had asked a question which Brahmananda repeats for Srila Prabhupada. Brahmananda, he's asking, when did you become the spiritual leader of Krishna consciousness? Prabhupada, when my Guru Maharaj ordered me. This is Guru Parampara. Try to understand, don't go very speedily. A guru can become guru when he's ordered by his guru. That's all. Otherwise, nobody can become guru. So only one's own guru has the authority to authorize you to become guru. And on the 22nd of April, 1977, Srila Prabhupada clearly stated that he had not yet given any such order yet to even one of his disciples. Then how does the GBC have the authority to override Srila Prabhupada and his instructions and declare that they have the authority to ordain or regulate Diksha Gurus? This is an extremely important question. Note that the GBC have never given any quote, verbal or written, in which Srila Prabhupada ever instructed and authorized the GBC to ordain gurus within his ISKCON mission. The GBC inform us that those devotees whom the GBC list on their official website, those and only those devotees are to be accepted as bona fide, authorized Diksha Gurus in Srila Prabhupada's mission. And this is according to who? Who says that these men are authorized and bona fide? Well, according to the GBC, they are saying those men are authorized. But who authorized the GBC to say who is an authorized guru or not? The GBC give the rubber stamp approval, declaring this person and that person as a bona fide Diksha Guru. But who the hell supposedly authorized the GBC to give the rubber stamp approval? Who authorized the GBC to ordain or regulate Diksha Gurus? I'll let you in on a little secret. There is no such instruction given by ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, where he ever, in any way, authorized the GBC to ordain or regulate Diksha Gurus in his mission. So where did the GBC come up with this idea that they can do such a thing? Just as with every other proof and evidence the GBC give to try to prove that their guru system that they have created or concocted is what Srila Prabhupada wanted, all such proof and evidence, it requires a lot of twisting and bending and reshaping of words and a lot of imagination, some mental speculation, all mixed with some GBC illusory magic dust to come up with their conclusions And the same goes for this idea that the GBC was given some sort of authority to ordain new gurus. The basis of this is that after Srila Prabhupada signed the July 9th Lister letter, he told Tamal Krishna that the GBC can add to that list. And Tamal Krishna immediately shared this with the other GBC men when he showed them the letter that Srila Prabhupada had just signed. Yes, we accept that Srila Prabhupada verbally told the GBC can add to the July 9th letter. That makes perfect sense. But what exactly is the list given in the July 9th letter? Anyone who reads that letter can clearly see that it is a list of Ritvik representatives. Period. In that list, there is absolutely no mention of these men ever becoming Diksha Gurus. The GBC have to sprinkle that verbal instruction with their imagined GBC magic dust, along with a lot of twisting and bending, and make that instruction fit their own concocted agenda. After applying sufficient magic dust, the GBC claim that Srila Prabhupada has authorized them to now ordain and give their rubber stamp of approval for authorizing Diksha Gurus. To do this, they claim that the July 9th list of 11 men is not just a list of Ritviks, but it really is a list of Gurus. Never mind the fact that Srila Prabhupada did not state that in the letter that he signed. Never mind that he only refers to them as Ritviks. We are told basically not to trust what Srila Prabhupada wrote or the letter he dictated and signed. Instead, the GBC want us to only trust what they tell us. They declare that during the May 28th meeting, that Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would become Diksha Gurus upon his disappearance. The GBC tell us not to trust what Srila Prabhupada actually said during that meeting, what he actually said is he would soon select men to act as Ritviks, and that it would be on his order, but by his order, when he orders, that anyone could become an actual guru. But the GBC's logic is that Srila Prabhupada wanted the Ritviks to become actually Diksha Gurus. They base this on what they want him to have said. But nowhere at any time did Srila Prabhupada himself ever give any direct and clear statement where he ever said that the men he will choose as Ritviks were to become Diksha Gurus. The point is that this is another glaring example of how the GBC system of so-called gurus is all based on bending and twisting, imaginative speculation, and a lot of GBC fairy dust to reach the bogus and baseless idea that Srila Prabhupada had authorized them to ordain and regulate Diksha Gurus. The GBC, they didn't want devotees to see the July 9th letter, and they hid it from us for many years because they didn't want us to trust what Srila Prabhupada had signed, a document that Srila Prabhupada had signed, that the list is just a list of Ritviks only and not a list of gurus. And the only thing that Srila Prabhupada had ever authorized to do in this regard was to add to the list of Ritvik representatives. He never authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus. The only persons who believe the GBC have such authority are those who have been put under the illusory spell of the GBC's magic fairy dust. It was in 1978 that the GBC started claiming that the 11 men were now 11 new gurus. And they told us that Srila Prabhupada had authorized them to add to this alleged list of gurus. Yet there is no direct and clear statement given by Srila Prabhupada where he clearly instructs that the Ritviks are to automatically become Diksha Gurus. There is no clear instruction, recorded or written, where Srila Prabhupada ever said that the GBC have authority to ordain additional Diksha Gurus or to regulate Diksha Gurus. Basically, the GBC have given themselves such so-called authority. Such a thing is baseless and bogus. Therefore, I am appealing to the devotees to have intelligence, to please wake up. Every single so-called proof the GBC has given is based on speculation, requiring so much twisting and bending and imaginative interpretation, along with this strong dose of GBC magic fairy dust. The GBC have absolutely no proof that Srila Prabhupada ever wanted the 11 men to become Diksha Gurus after he departed. No hard evidence where Srila Prabhupada clearly verbally said this or wrote that they were only to act as Ritviks while he was still living and they were to become Diksha Gurus after his disappearance. All they have ever done is quote themselves saying this is so. But there are no quotes where Srila Prabhupada ever said this. The real fact is the GBC have absolutely zero authorization to authorize Diksha Gurus. Then the next big question is, are all or even any of the many so-called GBC ordained gurus really bona fide or authorized by Srila Prabhupada to act as Diksha Gurus in his mission? While the GBC claim these devotees are bona fide gurus simply based on the fact that they say so, the fact is there is absolutely no proof at all, period, that Srila Prabhupada himself recognizes those devotees as being authorized by him, bona fide to act as Diksha Gurus in his mission. There is no such hard evidence or proof at all. The whole idea is nothing but a farce. This is why I often refer to the term so-called ISKCON gurus, because of the fact that Srila Prabhupada, he never authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus. He only authorized them to add to the list in the July 9th letter. And you read, and anyone can see that that is just a list of Ritvik representatives only, period. That is all that Srila Prabhupada authorized the GBC to add to. Not a so-called list of so-called gurus. So again, where does this leave all those so-called gurus who the GBC claim are bona fide just because the GBC says so? Are they really bona fide or not? On what basis are they bona fide? By whose authority? The real fact is none of these so-called gurus are bona fide. None of them, not one. Their entire system is baseless. They have no solid evidence supporting their system at all, or any aspect of it. Every single major aspect of their system is based only on their twisting and bending and speculative interpretations of the actual facts. Therefore, any honest and intelligent devotee can understand that none of the so-called gurus in ISKCON are actually authorized or bona fide. None of them. On April 28, 1974, in a letter to Rupanuga, Srila Prabhupada wrote, referring to his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his idea was Acharya was not to be nominated amongst the governing body. This is the only time that Srila Prabhupada directly speaks on the idea of GBC nominating gurus. And it is a quote from his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who stated that gurus are not to be nominated by the GBC. And when speaking of selecting gurus, on the 22nd of April, 1977, Tamal Krishna told Srila Prabhupada that it is not by rubber stamping. Rubber stamping is the process where someone or committee, such as the GBC, gives their stamp of approval and say that this man is now a guru because we say so. Srila Prabhupada replied to that sort of system. He said, you can cheat, but it will not be effective. Therefore, it is to be understood that the GBC have been engaging in an ineffective cheating process of rubber stamping or ordaining or nominating so-called Diksha Gurus without any authority whatsoever to do so. Their entire system is completely concocted and totally baseless, without any proof of hard evidence that it is at all what Srila Prabhupada wanted. According to Srila Prabhupada's own words, it is an ineffective cheating process only. While in his video, Amoga Lila goes on giving so many reasons why he feels the Ritvik system is impractical, etc., my rebuttal is already quite lengthy. I have refuted the major points he was making and established our own major counterpoints. So I will end my rebuttal to his, 1st of June 2025 video here. I implore all the sincere followers of His Divine Grace to please take the time to do your own research on this topic and not just blindly accept what the GBC tells you. The GBC have been very wrong in the past, even on this very issue. It was the GBC who created the failed and destructive zonal acharya system, which at the time, they demanded that everyone accept it. And those who rightly claimed that the GBC was wrong about that system, the GBC expelled them out from ISKCON's mission, such as Pradyumna Prabhu, who was a most dear disciple of His Divine Grace. Then many years later, the GBC finally admitted that Pradyumna was right, and the GBC was wrong about the zonal acharya system. They have been wrong about this guru system. So obviously, the GBC has not always been right. So please do your own research on this. As I said, I have just published an 1,100-page book on this topic, Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, the Definitive Analysis, which gives the historic accounts, the historical evidences, and the arguments. The book is there to help you in reaching your own educated conclusion on this all-important topic. Or if you prefer, you can watch the 30-plus hour videos and graphic presentation online at www.ritvik.org. Hare Krishna. All glories to ISKCON's founder, Acharya, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.